As long as they get familiar with the device you use in the classroom, and as long as they get familiar with your style of teaching, then you may deepen or you may complicate your rubric. Because they have already learned your style, they know what you want to do. So do not just give them a very hard rubric to read. And here is one hint for you. As your students really start to write their writing, please offer them the rubric when they start writing. Why? Because rubrics actually also offers the teacher's expectations for them. When you give your students to read the rubric in advance before they write, they will know what teachers want. For those students who have ambition to get the highest score, then they will look at the requirements in the rubric. So that's a way for teachers to direct students' learning. Okay? So before you ask students to write, offer them the rubric and actually explain the rules for them. And when they understand what the writing requirement is, then have them write. And later, you just use this rubric to check their writing performance, okay? And actually, this is about writing, but assessment can be used in various ways. I just mentioned how I use assessment to evaluate students' writing, right? But actually, in Taiwan, we have a large size classroom. When I use this way and when I share my experience with other teachers, they all complain. They would say, I have so many writings to read, to correct. I don't have so much time. So here, I just offer you the way I use. I also use the rubric, but I turn into another way. Checklist. But this checklist is not for the teacher, for students. Because students have already get the rubric, you explain that rule, right? And then when they write the first draft, you invite them to use that rubric as the checklist to check whether they have that element in their writing. And of course, if you think this rubric is not suitable, maybe you can create a writing checklist for them. For them to do self-checklist first, they can check by themselves. That's the way to develop their sense of responsibility. And then you invite them to do the cooperative learning. I mean, that checklist turn to peer checklist. Sometimes take me for example, even though I'm a careful writer, I would examine any errors, mistakes that in my writing, but there are still some I cannot find. So I need my peer fellows to help me. So take this group for example, I would ask students to do in pairs. They use that checklist again, but they use that checklist to read their peer classmates' writing. So as for what to correct, depends on your requirement, okay? And then after that, that means at least students' first draft have already been revised before they submit that to you. So you won't to see so many errors and feel very bad. So that's the way I train my students in the assessing part. And in this process, I just try to develop my students' responsibility. To correct writing is not the teacher's responsibility. As a writer, they must have this awareness. And we find that those high achievers, why they can write a perfect writing, because they have already been a responsible writer. they know what to do, they know what to revise. But for those beginners or average students, they don't have such awareness. So that's our teacher. We need to train them such awareness. So this is the last step in the assessment part. Yeah? Just like what I say when I first teach my students how to work with others, you also have to prepare shorty for your students. Why do I use this rubric? They have to know the purpose. Otherwise, students will blame or will doubt why they have this tool. Everything we want to do, before we do that thing, we have to figure out a statement to persuade our students why to do that. And because in my mind, I always believe that my students, after they're learning with me for 3 years, they will know how to be an independent learner. That's my teaching belief. So in my class, on the very first day, I would talk to them this belief. So when I use this rubric, I will first tell them the purpose of that. But I will not get them confused, so I start in a simple way. You see, this is a very complicated word, right? But actually, for my 10th grade class, the assessment is very simple, very, very simple. They just know what to do, then I just use that device to develop what I want them to do. Okay. Is there any question you want to ask? Then, now I have the last. Now here, everyone please grab my piece of paper. Now I want you to write down 3 points you learned from today's lecture. Only 3 points. You feel impressed or you learned the most from today's lecture. Please write down on this paper. Only 3 points. Okay, now I want you to share what you learned today in your group members. To share with each other what you learned today, okay?
The dilemma is just why the same as actually it's tell them why we do something. Yeah, because some students are really challenging, even though in primary school students. For example, yesterday, just yesterday, I used a fixed and once in a way is to create a there's some third grader giving